Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're talking about the silver fox known as Rabbi Tovia Singer, who is in the upper left-hand corner responding to a question. The answer is, the Messiah is among us. He is obviously a rabbi. He runs something called Outreach Judaism. Outreach Judaism is intended to, I guess, counter Christian missionaries who are always trying to convert the Jews. And in this mission, I support him. I think we should just leave the Jews alone. By we, I mean pretty much everybody. They've had it hard enough. So I support his work, and I love his videos. I think they're fantastic. But this one obviously caught my eye for the title, and I wanted to check this video out and watch it together and see what we can make of it. See if he's actually saying the Messiah is among us.
So a Messiah is always among us. That's why the Messiah is called a branch. Notice that Jesse in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1 is called a root, or it's a stump, the bottom of the tree, but there's no tree. It's all branches. Why is the Messiah called a branch? Because a tree has hundreds of branches. Maybe there are trees that have thousands of branches. I don't know.
I hate to interrupt so early, and it's a small thing, but one of my favorite things that he repeatedly mentions, because he does essentially refute Christian theology from a Judaism standpoint. Christians have justified their view of Jesus as the Messiah with a number of verses. One of these is, there's a verse in Isaiah chapter 53 which mentions a suffering servant. And Christians have used this historically to refer to Jesus. But if you read the surrounding chapters, it becomes clear that the suffering servant is in fact Israel and her people. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with anything he said or is going to say. I just find that kind of interesting, how different these interpretations of that chapter tend to be. Although I must note, as he says, the Old Testament, the Christian Old Testament, has chapters. Apparently, the texts in Judaism don't have chapters. I have read Judaism texts before, but I don't remember them not having chapters, so that's something else that I've learned from him. Again, I like the guy. He's got good content, so watch him if you get the chance. He's great. But on this, well, we'll see.
A lot of them. In every generation, there's a Mashiach who's ready to step forward. He's immortal. Eventually, he dies, and someone else from David and Solomon is ready then to step forward. And all the time, there's always Mashiach ready to step forward, always. What happened on October 6th?
Okay, before he goes into this terrible thing, I just want to say something else here, which is that I do find it interesting that apparently there's a Messiah waiting to do something in every generation. I would like to know who these other Messiahs have been over the last couple thousand years. I can think of a couple potential ones, but I'm not sure anybody would agree with that. I think David Ben-Gurion, who founded the State of Israel, is a pretty good candidate, I would imagine, from a perspective of like somebody who doesn't understand any of this anyway. And I know that there was a warrior in the early 100s who led rebellions against the Roman state that a lot of people thought would have been the Messiah. I forget his name. So there are a couple examples I can think of, but I would like to know who these other Messiahs could have been over the last couple thousand years. And of course, the issue here is who is the Messiah, not a Messiah. I think that's an important distinction. I'm not sure about this theology. I'm not an expert at Judaism, but it seems like he's saying there is a difference between a Messiah, and the Messiah is the one that's here now.
We were very much a divided nation. We were at each other's throats, protesting about Supreme Courts. So I don't know why, but I do know that the person I was on October 6th and the people you were on October 6th do not exist anymore.
I think what's interesting about this is he's obviously speaking to, I suppose, the Israeli audience of his show, because he does talk about things that were happening in Israel before October 7th, or October 6th, I guess, in their time, I suppose, which is that like they were having a lot of protests over Supreme Court stuff and Netanyahu trying to seize power in ways that are frankly unconstitutional, it seems like. Now, I'm using unconstitutional very loosely there. I don't know that they actually have any kind of constitution like we do, but I mean, the basic gist of the idea there is that he was doing it in a very I suppose, not exactly normal way, something that breaks with convention. So if we're talking about constitutionality, I'm not talking about like America Constitution. I mean like, the established rules and norms of a country, which Netanyahu seemed to be breaking. I'm just using very American terminology because I am terminally American minded. But yet, it is interesting to me how, even though he's presumably speaking to an Israeli audience, it does sort of apply to the rest of us too, because I think October 7th was a big, just very odd moment in a lot of places. In America, in the UK, I think we've learned a lot about each other from this experience. I obviously have great sympathy for the people who were victims on October 7th. And obviously, the roots of this conflict go way back. There's been a lot of mutual animosity and a lot of terrible, terrible things have happened. October 7th wasn't the start, but it is definitely a new peak in recent conflict and just an all around terrible thing. However, yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what happened next, which is tens of thousands of dead in Gaza and just the whole place basically destroyed. I mean, catastrophic damage to everything. So it's a very complicated situation, and it has made politics in the West a lot more complicated as well. I guess you could include Israel as a part of the West, but in America, for example, we have a very odd atmosphere. I mean, Jewish people are something like what, a couple percentage of America's population. I think Muslims are somewhere around 8%, maybe a bit less than that, but they do make up high percentages in areas like Dearborn, Michigan. So we have seen like a lot of conflict over that, people wanting a ceasefire, people wanting us to stop sending money to Israel and weapons to Israel. And it's just a big old mess, and Republicans are seizing on it to attack Democrats and tell the Jews, hey, come over here to us, we'll treat you right. They won't. So it really has changed things for all of us, not just Israel. Israel is the center point. They are the focus, but it has changed things for everybody everywhere at this point.
The people we all were on October 6th do not exist any longer. None of us will ever be the same. That I know for sure. And we're not at each other's throats now. We realize that many of the things that divided us were really quite silly. So the world has changed and has vacillated, which means an explosion of either pro-Jewish expressions or fiercely anti-Jewish expressions has exploded. Why?
I have thoughts here. This isn't supposed to be about the politics of Israel-Palestine, but I would be remiss to not cover it. Now, I do think because of the historical conditions the Jewish people have faced, which is to say pogroms, genocide, so on and so forth, I think the request for a Jewish homeland is not entirely out of left field. I don't consider myself a Zionist, but I would consider myself a supporter of that idea to an extent. Now, maybe making that state in the middle of a bunch of hostile countries, not the best move, but it's already done, so what can you say about it? We're not just going to, like, take all the Jewish people and move them out of Israel by force. That would be terrible for a lot of reasons. So that's not happening. I mean, it's a big problem that all of this is happening, but there's no going back now. We are where we are at this point. But, and what I would say is, he is correct that there has been a lot of pro-Jewish sentiment and a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment. You can find both, but I think it's also kind of reductionist because there have also been a lot of people who aren't anti-Jewish but are anti-Zionist. There have been a lot of Jews in the West who are very much anti-Zionist, but obviously not anti-Jewish because they are Jewish. I mean, I know plenty in Brooklyn. Very interesting people. And I think Tovia Singer himself is from Brooklyn, so he knows this. And again, I'm not disagreeing totally with what he said. I'm just adding additional context that's a bit of a simplistic way to look at things. I'm sure he didn't mean it like that necessarily, but I do feel like it's an important clarification to make.
Like, why would that happen? Doesn't make sense, right? But as it turns out, this was a trauma. This is the Messiah, the son of Joseph moment, meaning tremendous violence and turmoil that triggers a unity, a mourning and a unity. In fact, I discussed this in my latest video on Isaiah 15 through 23, which I recently released. The world will never be the same. You know, the pogroms of the past in the Ukraine, all over the Russian Empire, the most famous pogroms, how many Jews were killed in Kishinev in 1903 when the church announced that a dead boy that was discovered was killed by Jews because they were using his blood for them to bake matzah.
If this sounds vaguely familiar and you're not sure why, that's because it's blood libel, and it's been an accusation against Jewish people throughout history by any number of groups. It's been everywhere. It's terrible stuff. And funnily enough, it's not funny, but funnily enough, blood libel has made its way to American politics through things like QAnon, which have taken these sorts of, like, blood sacrifices to the unholy one, and just made them, like, Americanized, and then it's spread to other countries because America is just like the epicenter of, nightmare-level conspiracies at this point. So he's about to add more historical context, so I'll let him do that.
That was on April 19th, 1903, in Kishinev. And they went crazy, burnt down synagogues and murdered Jews for 2 days. 2 days. How many Jews were killed? 49. Kristallnacht. We just marked the 85th anniversary. It wasn't the beginning of the Holocaust, but in a sense, we can look to November 9th, 10th, as 1938, as essentially the fuse that triggered the Shoah. 92 Jews. Kristallnacht.
I think there is a distinction to be made between these terrible things and the October 7th terrible thing, and the distinction is just this. Israel today is a state controlled by the Jewish people, despite having a large Arab population. And so the Jewish people are not in the middle of, let's say, Germany or some other super hostile country, European or African or Middle Eastern. They have a country, and this country is very wealthy, it's very well armed, and it receives just billions and billions of dollars from outside sources. It's sort of like a not a fair fight, exactly. Palestine is not as well armed. It does not have the training or the money. It does not receive the money. So it's not exactly a fair fight, which, okay, fair enough. You can say it's not a fair fight, but you also have to acknowledge that the killing of 1,200 Jews in Israel on October 7th was also not a fair fight. I mean, these were largely innocent people they were attacking here. Entirely innocent people, I would imagine. I guess there could have been settlers among them, stuff like that, but for the most part, these were innocent people at the festival just trying to enjoy their lives. And I think it was a peace festival at that. These towns where people were kidnapped and killed and just terrified, that's some really terrible stuff. And there's no getting around that. Like, it was awful all around. So there's no way to justify that. And anybody who tries to, frankly, is a monster. But there is still the aspect of what happened next, which is just that the Israeli state laid waste to Palestine and just carried away tens of thousands of people. I'd imagine a lot of them were hostile forces, but a lot of them were also women and children and just innocent people in general. And I understand to an extent. I understand the justifications for it. Like, you have to do something. But I also know what a slippery slope that can be, that kind of thinking. Because I think back to 9/11. Tovia Singer, as I think I said already, I'm pretty sure he's from Brooklyn originally. So he has connections to 9/11 and America. And I assume he knows very well what it was like. America was attacked in a similar way for seemingly nothing. I mean, they had grievances, but it was seemingly the attack was for nothing on innocent people. And it was a huge trauma for all of America. And still is to this day. Like, I went to the 9/11 memorial and I could still, like, feel it. As much as I did the day it happened when I was 11 years old in class, in my mom's class. And I imagine that October 7th is going to feel like that for the people of Israel and Jewish people in general in a lot of instances. So I understand that. I understand how that felt. But I also know that Afghanistan and Iraq were enormous mistakes for America. And our government essentially used our unity against us. We were unified, just like the Jewish people in Israel are now. We were unified for a brief second until they took advantage of it here. So I would be very careful, and I would think that Tovia Singer is a savvy enough man to know that this is probably a time for caution, because people will take advantage of it. Netanyahu takes advantage of everything, so I imagine he will take advantage of this as well, and already has, really. And we also know from 9/11 that unity can lead to disunity in ways you don't even anticipate yet. I mean, really, when you think about America and what a hostile, toxic climate it is right now, how much we just hate each other for like no good reason a lot of the time. A lot of that does go back to 9/11 and our brief period of unity. And so my worry here would be that Israel is going to fall into a similar trap. This terrible thing happened to them, and they are unified against it. And this unity could be abused, and it could really divide their society much worse than they can even imagine right now. So, I just wanted to mention that. I know this video is supposed to be about the Messiah, but we are covering a lot of historical ground here, and I do think it's important because in order to understand why the idea of the Messiah is so important, I think you also have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who believes the Messiah is among us, as it were. I think you have to understand the historical context to understand how they come to these conclusions of the Messiah is among us. I think you have to understand these things. So let's keep going now.
You know what happened October 7th? I don't need to tell you. We are all in a state of trauma. All of us are. We're in a state of complete trauma. And right now, there are things have to happen and change, but we'll never be the same.
I don't think any of us will, really. I mean, we've all felt it. The whole world has felt this. This was a shot fired around the world, just like 9/11 was. It's been something, hasn't it?
So we are, as I've said to you in the past, we are now in the Messianic age. We are, meaning we are now observing the developments that are described in Tanakh unfolding before our eyes. And it's one of the things that's very striking about it is it's completely irrational. The things we see and the things we hear doesn't even make sense. It's not.
He's got a point there. I do think there is something to say about the things making no sense that we have seen happen recently. I just think they don't make sense on a lot of sides, in a lot of ways, in a lot of angles. I am a queer person, and I vaguely favor stopping the whole Palestine mess. I think it's fine to go after Hamas, but I think this conflict has gone well beyond Hamas, and something needs to be done about that. I am not a politician, so I can't really say what. But I think, this whole situation is so wild. The idea of queers for Palestine as a group is indeed kind of silly when you think about it. And the justifications that queers for Palestine give, some of them I think are perfectly valid. Like, I think it is perfectly valid to feel a commonality with people you see as oppressed, in this case, Palestinians. But some things are just straight up nonsense, like saying that there is a queer life in Palestine, like there's queer nightlife in Palestine, or there are trans people in Palestine, queer people living normal lives in Palestine. I think that's a whole bunch of cope. Frankly, I don't buy that at all. So it is weird and nonsensical. He's talking about the attacks not making sense, and I agree with that too. And I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen the second I heard the news. Before even the death tolls came out, just hearing how bad it was, before they knew everything that had happened yet, I just knew. I was like, this is going to be bad, and it's going to be bad for Palestine especially. They have lit a fuse, just to use his terminology there about Kristallnacht, in a sense. They have sown seeds of their own destruction, and they have done so willingly. So the whole attack doesn't make much sense. I don't understand it. I don't understand the rationale for it. The only thing I can come back to is, yes, they have these historical grievances, But I definitely feel like, in a lot of senses, they just hate Jews. Like, that's the only real explanation I can come up with for why they would do an attack like that. Um, so it doesn't make a lot of sense in most ways. It really doesn't. The whole situation just doesn't make a lot of sense. So he's right about that. And we see these scenes of violence and destruction, and our brains can't make sense of it. I'm speaking today, if you're watching this in the future, I'm speaking today after there was just an attack in Moscow. ISIS apparently attacked a theater in Moscow, killing over 60 people, wounding 150 plus others, burning the place pretty badly. And that's in Moscow. And the U.S. apparently had warned Russia that it was going to happen, and Russia just ignored it. And it happened. And I've seen videos of it. It's nasty. It's really terrible. It's not the kind of thing you should ever want to see, but I saw it by accident. So just terrible stuff. Seeing scenes like that does really do something to us. It does break something in us. And that's not even like, quote unquote, my people, the people of Moscow, for the most part. That's not like queer people, trans people, Americans, probably. People on, the other side of the planet that I have nothing to do with. And I still feel it very acutely, even though Russia is the big bad right now. Because these are innocent people, just there, trying to live their lives, being taken out for what seems like no reason at all. And watching the scenes from October 7th, I felt the same way. Like, these are innocent people being, like, mowed down, and the footage was just devastating. And I feel it when I see footage about Palestine. It's terrible all around. So it is hard to comprehend, and it must be that much harder when you are, like Tovia Singer, a Jewish person looking at videos or hearing stories of these events. Or if you are Palestinian and seeing videos and pictures of Palestine, assuming you're outside of Palestine at the time. Even worse if you're there, obviously. But like, it is beyond our comprehension. And that I think we can all relate to. But there's always a but here. I have to, this is an atheist channel. I can't just go on about my sympathies for everybody, because I do have them, but I can't just go on about that forever. So there is a but here. The language he's using to describe the Messianic age is like what I've heard from Christians, fundamentalist Christians. Fundamentalist Christians after 9/11, I mean, they were awash in end times talk, and everything was a sign of the end times. Every action, every war, every conflict, everything. Ariel Sharon going into a coma, everything was a sign of the end for these people. But here we are, 20 years later, 20 plus years later, we're still here. But the damage done was to a lot of people I'm sure some of you watching felt terrified about these end times. I'm sure some of you took it very seriously. I didn't. I thought it was all a big joke. But I'm sure a lot of you took it very seriously. And there's an image kind of like, stuck in my head from the summer after 9/11. It was my sister, my mom, me, and my nephew. We were all going to another town to shop. And they were talking about the apocalypse and how it was coming, which was very odd. We're going out to shop and have a good time, and they're talking about, here comes the end of the world. And I remember my nephew curling up into a ball and dramatically saying, if I'm going to die like this. He was 5 years old at that time. And I have mentioned that to him later on, and he said it was a traumatic thing. So I imagine there will be similar stories in Israel. And of course, if you're Palestinian, well, there may be even a lot worse than that. So I've heard this stuff before, and every time I've heard it, it's been wrong. So he's saying it, and I think he's going to be wrong. Time will tell. But let's see what he has to say.
Not logical. I mean, if you see someone robbing a bank, it's very logical. They want the money. This didn't make any sense at all.
I think you can make some sense of it, though, in like using a different analogy. Let's say somebody gets with your girlfriend while you're gone. You see the guy. You want to punch him in the nose. Now, I'm not like that. I don't think I'd want to do that at all. I don't want to get in a fight. I'd probably get beaten half to death. And in the case of like Hamas, these terrible monsters, they probably I guess, might have looked back on historical tragedies like the Nakba and such, ethnic cleansing, and been like, well, I just want to punch those people in the nose. And I think all of us can, in some sense, understand the feeling of wanting to get back at somebody. But obviously, attacking Israel, if you're from Palestine, is never going to be the move. It's never going to be the move because obviously, look at the carnage. I mean, Palestine looks a lot worse than this. And in Blade Runner 2049, this city was hit with like a dirty bomb. So things are pretty rough currently.
Didn't make any sense. It doesn't help anybody out. So we are living in the events that are going to bring Mashiach, and that's we can see Ezekiel 38 and 39. So the world will turn to the God of Israel, those who are faithful. There are some who will remain enemies of the God of Israel, but ultimately, this is a precursor to Mashiach, and it's happening now. I mean, Mashiach is here now. The events that are described in Tanakh are happening right now, right now. I mean, when I say now, I mean in this past 75 years. I mean, this is all Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7.
It's kind of funny that like a lot of Christians would agree with what he's saying right now, even though he obviously thinks they're wrong about pretty much everything. A lot of Christians would agree with that actually, and they predict the end times based on the same sorts of things. So that's sort of interesting, isn't it?
It's all so transparent. But we are all, and I don't even know you, but I could say this without fear of being contradicted. The people we were on October 6th no longer exist. We're not the same. None of us are. And we are all traumatized, and that trauma is still ongoing.
I would assume, I am a Gentile raised by some super Gentiles, so I don't have the historical connection to really understand how people felt about certain things at certain times. But I imagine if you were a Jewish person witnessing the Holocaust, or even worse, becoming a victim of it, you might have thought that it would either be the full-on extermination of the Jewish people, or a sign that the Messiah was on his way. And if you thought either one, you were wrong. Obviously, the Holocaust was terrible. Don't got to say anything about that. I mean, 6 million innocent people, carried off in just terrible ways, beyond words. And if you were a Jewish person at that time, it must have looked like one of those two things was going to happen, but neither one of them did. I mean, the Holocaust did, obviously. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the Jewish people survived and the Messiah did not come. So I don't think that a Messiah is coming now. I'm sad to say because, do I wish that somebody would come along and fix all of this? Do I wish somebody would come along and heal the world? And do I wish that somebody would be right about all this for once and everybody could just find peace? Sure. Apparently the role of the Messiah in Judaism, the big one, is to unite the world by turning them to the God of Israel. So obviously the Christians haven't done that. And that's not in their mission, I don't think. But that's what his interpretation of the Jewish Messiah is. The Messiah is going to come and heal the world and turn everybody to the God of Israel. Now, obviously, you know the opinions I have about the God of Israel. I don't think he's a nice guy. But again, I would like to hope, I really would, that somebody could just come along and fix all of this. But I don't think they are. And I think we are the ones who have to deal with this. Me and you and Rabbi Tovia Singer and the people of Israel, the people of Palestine, the people of America, the people of Europe, the people of the Anglosphere, the people of the Middle East. It's on us. Nobody is coming to save us. Nobody's coming. I say to the Christians, he's never coming back. I'll say to the Jewish people, he's never coming. And again, I wish I wish that somebody was coming to fix it. I think everybody can wish that at this point. We've seen too much bloodshed over the course of human history. But it's all up to us. Let's see what else he has to say.
Every night we go to sleep wondering what will we see the next morning in the news, right? Now, how do I know this? Do I have a camera in your house, right? No, I know this. We're all in a state of trauma, and this is now preparing our generation, for this redemption. So, yes, we're living in this time.
And, you know, again, I don't think we are. Would that it were so simple, but it is not simple. Instead, it's all on us. And do I think that we are doing it right? Well, no, I don't. I don't think we're doing it right. I think the actions of Hamas were reprehensible. I think the actions that Israel has taken in Palestine are mostly reprehensible. And I don't think anybody's coming to save us from ourselves. I don't think Jesus will save the Christians from themselves. I don't think there's a Messiah coming to save the rest of us from all of it. I don't think anybody's coming to save us. It's all up to us, and I know that's a scary thought. I understand why people want to rely on religion. The idea that it's people like us, you and me, the viewer, and Rabbi Tovia Singer, and the people of Israel and Palestine who have to solve these things. I know that's scary because look at how well we've gone about solving them before. And we may not ever solve it. This conflict in Israel and Palestine might go on for centuries or millennia even. And at the same time, we still have to try. We still have to do something. What that is, I don't know. I'm not the Messiah. I can't answer these questions. But I can say it is all up to us. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.